I hope you all had a great night last night. It was wonderful to get to know you all a little bit better, and I hope that you all got some sleep. We have a packed day today. Starting with our opening session with Mr. Steve Okun, who is going to be speaking to us about what the 2024 elections mean for global trade. Steve is the senior advisor to the international strategic firm McLarty Associates. He's CEO of the ESG sustainability firm APAC Advisors and chair of AmCham's of the Asia Pacific. He also, full disclosure, served in the Clinton administration, but he has been talking about this, covering this, thinking about it a lot. So he is very prepared to answer any and all of your questions. So I'm looking forward to, a really kind of robust discussion, pulling even on from what we heard last night and just kind of continuing that. So please join me in welcoming Steve.
Oh, thank you, Anne. This is, I think, the third time I've addressed the fellows. So great to be back. Great to have you all in Singapore. So as Anne mentioned, I am a Democrat. I did work in the Clinton administration in the Clinton White House, and thank you very much for not laughing at that photo. I usually get a lot of laughs when I put that up, but that was me in the President in the Oval. I think that picture was 1997. So I'm a Democrat, but I take my Democratic hat off because it doesn't do you any good to hear Democratic talking points. So I really do this as a political analyst, play it straight down the middle, and if you catch any bias in a room full of reporters, I'm sure you'll call me out for that. I've been in Singapore for 21 years now. After I left the administration, I went to UPS's Washington office, where I ran our international aviation negotiating team from. Then they sent me here in 2003 to build and lead public affairs for UPS in Asia. Did that for 7 years. Then I joined the global investment firm KKR to build and lead public affairs for KKR, which includes ESG. So not my foresight, but I was the first person to work in global private equity and ESG in Asia. And then for the last 7 years, became a bit more entrepreneurial, created my own firm. I spent half my time in the ESG public private capital space and half my time in geopolitics. And increasingly, these two sections are intersecting more and more. In fact, I used to say I worked at the intersection of business and government for my career, but now I say I work at the collision of business and government because that's where we are. And before we go on, I'll just say it dawned on me when I was looking at this photo that Bill Clinton was president for 8 years. He's been out of office for 23 years, and he is still younger than either Joe Biden or Donald Trump. So where true he is. Yes, I know. I wouldn't put up any false information. No fake news today, right? And so it is a different era that we are in. So to start, because obviously we talk politics and you talk about somebody who works on campaigns, we have to do a poll. So everybody has to raise their hand. Sitting out this one, you get one or two choices. Now the question isn't who do you want to win? I want to see in this room get a sense of who you think is going to win. How many people in this room think Joe Biden is going to win? 2. Wow, 2, 3. All right. How many people think Donald Trump's going to win? It better be every other hand. You are pretty consistent in this in Asia. Most people in Asia, when I do this presentation, I've done this presentation at least a dozen times, if not more. Most people in Asia think Donald Trump is going to win. And I'll try and explain why that is. Why, if I were doing it, some days I'd raise my hand for Trump, some days I'd raise my hand for Biden. It's really, really going to be very close. So to understand our politics, you need to understand the rules of our game. And the rules of our game when it comes to presidential campaigns is that we don't have one election on election day in the US. We have 51 elections. There are 50 states in the District of Columbia, the last place I lived before I moved out here. So it's 51 campaigns are run simultaneously. And those are 51, DC and the 50 states. They have a grand total of 538 electoral votes. Each state is assigned a number based on its population, basically. And so what you need to do to win is get to 50% plus 1, which is 270. So what we're going to talk about today is each campaign strategy on how it's going to get to 270 and how it looks. Now, in 2016, Donald Trump won in the Electoral College. He got 304, so he easily cleared the 270 votes. He had 304 despite losing the popular vote. He got about 3 million votes less than Hillary Clinton. And if you just switch less than 80,000 votes, the right 79,316 votes in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, Hillary Clinton would have won. That's how close we were in 2016, less than 80,000 votes. 2020, we were even closer. Again, Joe Biden had 360 electoral votes. Pretty easy if you look at that number, 306 to 232. 79 million to 73 million, nearly 7 million more votes overall. Yet you flip 42,922 votes in 3 states, Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin, Donald Trump would have won. So 2016 was incredibly close. 2020 was even closer, and 2024 is likely to be somewhere in that same ballpark. No one knows who's going to win this thing right now. It's way too close. Now, what's happened since I started to work on a campaign the first time, so the first campaign I worked on was really 92, Bill Clinton's campaign, and there were about 23 states that we were competitive in. Could have gone for Bill Clinton, could have gone for George Herbert Walker Bush. We didn't know. It was a national campaign. The United States has become so polarized and so hyper-partisan that we're now down to about 7 states that matter. The other 43 states in the District of Columbia are irrelevant when it comes to this campaign. So we only want to watch, if we're trying to figure out who's going to win, those 7 states. And even these 7 states probably aren't a full 7 in play right now. It could be down to 4. So that's what we want to watch as we watch this campaign. Now, the first question I often get when we start talking about this, and Ann and I were talking about it before, is some variation of, seriously? You have 300 plus million people in your country, and these are the 2 who are running for president? This is who you selected? Why is it that we have these 2 running and not anybody else who's younger and more energetic and is appealing to more of the country? And it's very interesting because the Republicans and the Democrats ended up with these 2 candidates for the exact opposite reasons, right? Donald Trump owns the Republican Party. He owns the base of the Republican Party. And even though the elites in the Republican Party don't like him necessarily, many of them still don't like him, quite a few haven't even endorsed him, doesn't matter. The base loves Donald Trump, and so he was going to be the nominee no matter what the establishment wanted. The Democrats, it's the exact opposite. If you poll the majority of Democrats, they may like Joe Biden personally. They may think he did a good job in his first term, but they want somebody else. But the elites decided that it would be too divisive in the Democratic Party to have an open primary. And we'd relive what we relived a bit in 2016, where you'd have Bernie Sanders on one side and Hillary Clinton on the others, and this would drag out. It would bring up a lot of wounds, except it'd be even worse now. And so the elites kind of said, no one else is going to run who is of any significance whatsoever, and we're going to go with Biden. So that's why we have Biden and Trump, 2 opposite reasons, get us to the same place from the Republicans and the Democrats. And few people want this rematch. Right? When Pew just did a poll, 25% of Americans have unfavorable attitudes towards both. This is pretty rare to have, or at least it's rare over the longer term to have unpopular candidates running for president. And so we're in a situation where the question we ask as a political analyst is, who is going to get the most double haters? Right? We know who's going to vote for Biden on the Democratic side. We know who's going to vote for Trump on the Republican side. But there's this large middle now of people who don't like either. And they're called now the double haters. And so the question is, who is going to get those double haters in this election? Again, this is relatively new. If you go from 1988 through 2012, at least one, if not both, and often both of the Democrat and Republican candidates had a favorable rating amongst all people. Most candidates were above 50%. in all races. It's only in the last three, when we had Clinton, Trump, Biden, Trump, Trump, Biden, where all four of them are what we would say underwater. So this is a relatively new phenomenon in the U.S. Hopefully, our country will revert back and we'll have popular candidates, both Democrats and Republicans running, but not the trend where we're headed. So in this situation, where we are today, what is the prognosis for Democrats? Well, Joe Biden is facing a near historic deficit for an incumbent. Americans, the voters, believe that our country is on the wrong track. They've believed we are on the wrong track as opposed to going in the right direction for more than 20 years now. And it's getting worse and worse and worse every year. And so the situation is you have an incumbent where nearly 3/4 of the people do not like the direction the country is going in. What happens in this situation? Well, when we are in this type of situation, the incumbent or his party loses. So 1980, 1992, 2008, 2020, when satisfaction was this low in the US, the president's party was defeated every time. And that's where we are right now in the United States. If we want to take a look at the issues, what are the three issues overall voters care about? Right? It's immigration, which is a huge problem in the United States. It is the economy and inflation. And for many Americans, even though if you look globally, the US is outperforming nearly every economy in the world. Yet for many Americans, they are very concerned with high prices. They're very concerned with the cost of housing, with either to own or to rent. They're very concerned about food. They're very concerned about gasoline. And so huge issue for Americans. And then the third is crime and drugs, which is actually shouldn't be a huge problem in the US right now. If you look at the numbers, they're going down, but the perception is it's a real problem. So you look at these top three issues and you ask voters, who's going to do better, Biden or Trump, when it comes to their top three issues? And the answer is Trump, 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 right? Trump, voters trust to secure the border and control immigration. They trust Trump more to deal with the economy. They trust Trump more to deal with crime and violence. So on those issues, Biden trails Trump when it comes to the key issues that most voters are looking at. But you never know what's going to happen in this campaign because our country is so divided and things are going to be so close. So what is Biden's path to victory? He has to focus on three things. One, if the economy does get better, and inflation comes down, and the economy continues to improve, that should help with Joe Biden's numbers. So a little bit of this is outside of his control. Then it's also going to be about abortion, which we will talk about in a moment. And then, of course, it's about who he's running against, Donald Trump, who has unfavorable ratings. So you want to focus on these three things if you're the Biden campaign. Now, the question is, can the Biden campaign get its message out? If you ask voters, what types of policies do you support? They support the same types of policies that Joe Biden has been supporting as president and is running on. He wants to reduce the federal deficit. He wants to cap Medicare and drug costs. He wants to restrict China's use of AI chips. He wants to sue big tech companies. All of these things Joe Biden is supportive of, but voters don't know it. The voters say, I'm supportive of this, but I'm not aware that Joe Biden is supportive of it too. So can the Biden campaign get its message out that it is more aligned with voters than they think they are? The problem is it's very hard to get your message out when Donald Trump sucks up all the oxygen in the room, right? It's hard to get your message out when it's Israel, Gaza is one of the top issues that the press is covering over and over and over again. And it's also, is Biden a good, effective campaigner? So you've got those three obstacles. Can he overcome them in the next 5 or 6 months, right? The other thing, right, on abortion, ever since the Supreme Court took away a woman's constitutional right to have an abortion up to a certain period of time, and this is the first time in the history of the United States that a constitutional right was taken away from an American. And after that happened, about half the states have put in abortion bans, some banning it outright in literally every circumstance possible. Others with a 6-week ban, which is essentially a total ban. Others with variations on 12 to 22 weeks. This is deeply unpopular with Americans. And if you look at those voters who are single issue voters, not about the economy, not about inflation, not about immigration, but if they are single issue voters and you ask them, are you pro-life or pro-choice, it has skyrocketed since the Supreme Court decision and states putting in these bans. And now literally a quarter of single issue voters are voting because they want to protect their reproductive freedoms. And this can really change the election. And the Biden campaign is really focusing on this, and Republicans are struggling. And so you see Joe Biden campaigning on defending the right to choose. You see Kamala Harris going to a clinic that provides abortion. That has never been done before. I mean, when Bill Clinton ran, right, the position was you want abortion to be safe, legal, and rare. Right? That was the position of most Democrats for years. Now it is we have to protect reproductive freedoms, full stop. Right? It has, there may be a limit in the at the end of the second trimester, but no limits other than that. Women have the right to choose. Women have reproductive freedoms, and that is something very new and for Democrats. And as Joe Biden said in the State of the Union, Democrats won or outperformed every election in 2022 and in 2023 when abortion was an issue. And he said that Republicans are going to find out again. It's going to be an issue for them in 2024. And so this can really change the battlefield. And finally, part of the difficulty with the Biden campaign is how do you get these double haters to get off the couch and vote for Biden as opposed to staying on the couch on election day? So you really go after Trump. You sound the Trump alarm. You talk about the threat to democracy. You talk about how Donald Trump parrots Hitler, which you never would have made a Hitler comparison in American politics. But now that's the way the Biden campaign is trying to get what they say is the danger a second Trump term could have. And so you talk about that this is the moment we have to stand up for democracy. So can the Biden campaign get those people who are deciding between Biden and the couch because they think he's too old, they're not happy with their rent, they're not happy with their loans, they're not happy with what's happening in Gaza, but you've got to get them off the couch, and this is the other way to do that. All right, so where do we stand now? I had that earlier map about those 7 swing states. Well, my old professor, Professor Larry Sabato, University of Virginia, who I studied under, so this is his latest map. And he has said, take those 7 states, and 2 of them we're going to give to Trump. Georgia and North Carolina, they're off the board already. And then Michigan, we're going to give to Biden. We think Michigan is trending well for Biden. So if you take that, you have Trump up 251 to 241, and that leaves 4 swing states. We're down from 7 to 4, and that's Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And so what the campaigns are going to try and do is focus on this map and say, how can I get to 270? All right? And so will Pennsylvania decide this election by 1 electoral vote? Will we be that close? So if Donald Trump keeps Georgia and North Carolina, as Professor Sabato has right now, of course the map can change, but if he can keep what he has and he just picks up Pennsylvania, he wins. He could lose every other swing state that's out there. He wins and the election is over. What does Joe Biden have to do? He has to hold Michigan. He has to pick up Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. He does that. He gets to 270. So 2 scenarios that are very likely get us to 270 to 268. And if you think we had the whole stop the steal rigged election last time around, wait till you see what happens if it's 1 electoral vote. So this is kind of where we play out right now. Now, there are a couple wild cards we'll talk about. One of which is, could any of these 3 people decide the election? Does anybody know who's in this picture? Look, most people do not get 2 out of 3. If you'd have gotten 3 out of 3, I would have been really impressed. But 2 of 3 is still impressive, right? So we've got Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's running as a third-party candidate. Jill Stein, who's running for the Green Party, is a third-party candidate. And Cornel West is running as a third-party candidate as well. And Donald Trump literally said yesterday, he was very happy that Jill Stein and Cornel West were running because they will take anyone who votes for them, it's 100% away from Biden. So if in such a close election, remember about 43,000 votes last time, if Jill Stein picks up the right 15, 20,000 votes and Cornel West picks up the right 15, 20,000 votes, they swing the election to Donald Trump. And so there's a haze over the battlefield because in such, they're not going to win. They're not going to win. They're not going to be president. They're not going to win any state, but they could make the difference in such a close election. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is the biggest wild card because with the Kennedy name, which is, you don't get a more royal name in U.S. Democratic politics than Kennedy, so he could be taking votes away from Biden. But he is an anti-vaxxer. Right? He is very much against government interfering in certain aspects of your life, which is very much a MAGA America First kind of politics. So we don't know who he's going to take votes away from. So it's really hard to predict the election with these three because in such a close election, either of these three could decide the election. And there's another person who could decide the election. If she comes out, if Taylor Swift comes out and endorses Joe Biden at the right time, could she swing 40,000 votes, 50,000 votes, 100,000 votes? Of course she could. So who knows what's going to happen in this election? It could be somebody like Taylor Swift who ends up being the deciding point. And then we have another wild card coming up this week, and that's the presidential debate. We have never had a presidential debate this early in the election cycle. We've never had a presidential debate. Well, maybe I guess you could go back to the two previous, where you have two candidates fighting over the double haters. And so it's very possible this could be the most consequential 90 minutes in U.S. presidential campaigning history. It's also possible this is a nothing burger. We have, these guys are so well known, they may not change anybody's mind on anything. But if something really out of the ordinary happens, especially with both of them being as old as they are, maybe this ends up changing things. So we have another wild card that we have to watch. All right, so before we get into geopolitics, I'm going to pause here, see if you guys have any questions on anything I said or anything else. Yep.
Hold on.
Oh, wait. Oh, we have a mic coming.
Is senility an issue?
Yeah, that goes in with age, right? Is senility an issue? The voters have concerns for both candidates of their cognitive abilities. Whether they should or shouldn't doesn't matter. They do. And so the question will be, and this debate will have a lot to do with that, will that swing one way or the other? But no question, do you think if the candidates go in and you think one of them is not up to the job, it could cost them the election? Another question? Yep. Oh, wait till you get the mic.
Hi. What about the program like Welcome Crops? Will it still going to continue?
Which program?
The Welcome Crops, by which they invite refugees from different part of the world, and Biden has announced around 100,000 refugees will be taken by this end of this year.
Okay, I would say general, if you want to talk about immigration, that is a huge issue, right, in this campaign. And you will certainly see what Joe Biden is trying to do is to show, in one way, he is going to be much tougher on immigration. He's going to control the border. He's going to make sure that people don't come across who don't deserve to come across, who haven't followed the rules in terms of applying for work visas or asylum or whatever it might be to come across. But then he also wants to be compassionate as well. And you've seen recently where he has come up with a couple of orders, one in particular, which is to allow undocumented people in the U.S. who are married to Americans to get citizenship. And so that, I think, would, again, I don't know that Joe Biden's campaign has taken a position, but it would fall into the latter. You will see Donald Trump much more likely to take only that we've got to shut down the border, we've got to keep people from coming in. He had a Muslim ban his first time around. He will probably try and do one a second time around or something similar. So that's kind of where each candidate is on immigration. Joe Biden is trying to be tough on immigration and compassionate. You don't see the compassion as much out of the Trump campaign. One more and then we'll go on to geopolitics. Yep.
So my name is Nghi from Vietnam. So how do you think about a voter from TikTok, especially those that we call Gen Z voter for the both candidates?
Okay, so how will TikTok impact the election? And it's the way, obviously, that what the Trump campaign is trying to focus on is that they see that they're trying to peel away as many younger voters who have gone heavily for Biden in the past and Democrats in the past. They're trying to peel away with that. So Donald Trump, who wanted to ban TikTok when he was president, is now in favor of TikTok because he sees it as a way to get younger voters. I mean, that's part of why it's a little bit more difficult to predict what Donald Trump's going to do, because he can be transactional, such as he is with TikTok. Now, with the ban not coming, and I should say it's not a ban on TikTok, it is a divestiture of ByteDance when it comes to TikTok. So ByteDance could divest from TikTok and then it stays in the US. But whatever happens, it is designed to only happen after Election Day. So I think when you're talking about younger people, they're focused on their reproductive freedoms. They're focused on Israel and Gaza. I would say TikTok, if it's up there, is a distant third. So I really think, because it's going to happen later, because no one knows what's going to happen, that it's going to not be a factor in this election as much. All right, we'll go on to geopolitics, and then I'll have plenty of questions afterwards as well. But first, I'll do a quick diversion on sustainability, which does impact all of us in the world. Sustainability, no question, is on the election here, and we're going to have two very different approaches depending on who wins. So when Joe Biden was asked what worries him the most, right, Joe Biden said, well, we have that crazy SOB like that guy Putin and others, and we always have to worry about nuclear conflict, but the existential threat to humanity is climate. And the Biden administration may not be perfect on climate for some people, but they have taken very aggressive actions, especially through the use of subsidies when it comes to addressing the climate crisis. Now, Donald Trump has a different take. What is Donald Trump's view on climate? What's his view on renewables? I hate wind. That is how Donald Trump describes how he thinks about wind farms. Why does Donald Trump hate wind? He says, look, if you have a windmill anywhere near your house, congratulations, your house just went down 75% in value. And they say the noise causes cancer. And of course, it's like a graveyard for birds. Right? So we're going to have very different approaches on climate, especially when it comes to renewables, wind, EVs, between Biden and Trump. Now, the Biden administration 2.0, he will likely, because very hard to imagine Congress is going to do anything like it did through the Inflation Reduction Act. So it is going to be very regulatory focused. He's going to take steps, his administration will take steps for net zero by 2050. He will put tougher limits on vehicle emissions to boost EVs. He will increase EPA funding. He'll continue to contribute to global climate finance. Trump is going to roll back. Now, he can't roll back everything, but he is going to roll back. And he said to oil company CEOs, if you give $1 billion towards my campaign, that will be a very good investment from you. He'll withdraw from Paris again. He will end or minimize participation in COP summits. He will renege on U.S. pledged finance commitments. He'll repeal or favor the repeal of the Inflation Reduction Act, or at least make executive changes to parts of that. And so not only will this have an impact in the US, but the question will be for foreign governments. If the US isn't going to contribute to climate solutions, if the US isn't going to be part of Paris, if the US isn't going to be in COP anymore, why should I be doing it? And so there's going to be a lot of impacts of a Biden administration versus a Trump administration when it comes to sustainability. Now, more broadly, when we talk about what the US election means for Asia, I'm going to read you two quotes and see if you can guess who did each one. First quote, what we're trying to do in this corrective phase of globalization is to focus on the individual, the human being, the worker, the community, which really forms the human component of our economy. And that's one quote. Second quote, our guiding principles are the primacy of American workers, families, and communities in all we do. Well, that top quote is from Joe Biden, and that bottom quote is from the America First Policy Institute, which is kind of a Trump think tank government in waiting. So The America First foreign policy, worker-centric trade policy, there is a lot of similarity between the Biden and the Trump administration. It's not going to be like sustainability. So we're going to have some continuation, regardless of who wins from an Asia perspective when it comes to trade and economics. So what are the bipartisan economic focus areas when it comes to China? Whoever wins, the U.S. industrial policy and subsidies will continue. Whoever wins, we're going to have new and more protectionism. There will be more bans. There will be more export controls. There will be more tariffs. There will be a focus on transshipments, which is really important, which I'll talk about in depth in a moment. And then when it comes to China, we are going to protect ourselves against the excess capacity in China and all the dumping that is going on when it comes to batteries, when it comes to EVs, when it comes to legacy chips, when it comes to solar panels, when it comes to steel. And it's not just the US. We see the EU is doing very similar to what the Americans are doing when it comes to China. And this is what is going to continue regardless of who wins in November. Now, difference in approach, very much so. So the Biden administration has a lattice policy when it comes to Asia. So a lattice is, right, you bring all of these different strings, different chords together, and it makes things much stronger. And so Prime Minister Kishida's recent visit to Washington is an example of this lattice approach, where the U.S. is trying to work very in much stronger from an economic perspective, from a military perspective, from a diplomatic perspective when it comes to Japan, maybe even having Japan join AUKUS, the Australia-UK-US agreement on nuclear subs, maybe becomes JAUKUS even. We could even go that far. Now, there is still going to be domestic politics that are going to play even under the Biden administration on the U.S.-Japan, such as the U.S. saying, or the President Biden saying, there's national security concerns about Nippon Steel acquiring U.S. steel, even though no one's really been able to articulate what those national security concerns are. But certainly in an election year, there are national security concerns that are going to be raised when it comes to something like that, even for a country like Japan, even for an administration like President Biden's. Now, Donald Trump, his foreign policy, I can't remember who came up with this phrase, but transactional isolationism. Right? So he's going to be very transactional in his approach to foreign governments and to foreign policy, with a focus on isolating and decoupling the U.S. So the world, as the Biden administration or the Trump administration or former Trump administration officials see the world and what Donald Trump is going to have to address, they say in the 4 years under Joe Biden, China has risen, the Middle East has burned, and Russia has rampaged in Ukraine. So what is it that the Trump administration is going to do, right, about those three things? Well, we can give a couple examples. One is up in Korea, right, where the U.S. and U.S. forces Korea and the South Korean military have had a presence ever since the armistice in between North and South Korea. And Donald Trump has said, if South Korea doesn't pay more to support U.S. troops to deter Kim Jong-un, then we should withdraw. Why would we defend somebody? And we're talking about a very wealthy country. So very different than a lattice approach. The Trump administration is not going to have that type of approach. They will have a very different approach when it comes to bilateral relations in this part of the world. Donald Trump, then, on the other hand, when it came to providing the $60 billion to Ukraine and money to Israel and money to Taiwan, Donald Trump was silent on that, even though that kind of MAGA-verse was opposed to giving more money to Ukraine. And what after that Ukraine vote, when Donald Trump stayed silent, somebody said, off the record, right, you can't depend on him for anything. The source who has publicly weighed in for Trump said bitterly. He didn't do anything to stop it. He's only motivated by self-interest. So it's very hard to figure out where Donald Trump is going to go on foreign policy on any given issue, like TikTok, right? He was against it, then he was for it, right? Ukraine, he was against it, then he was silent. So very difficult, but we know the way to at least start to think about how a Trump 2.0 approach would be when it comes to foreign policy. So that said, in this part of the world, when it comes to trade, I'm sure probably Deb talked about this a lot last night, so I'll go very fast, right? There's a lot of opportunities in this part of the world. You have CPTPP, you have RCEP, and you have the Biden administration with its Indo-Pacific economic framework. So you kind of have a U.S.-led focus. You have, a Japan, Australia, Singapore, Canada-led focus, and then you have an ASEAN, China, Japan, Korea, Australia focus. And so here in this part of the world, certainly in Southeast Asia and in Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, being in all three of them gives them a lot of opportunity. But you're going to see a big difference here when it comes to the Biden and the Trump administration, because Donald Trump has vowed to kill IPEF if he is elected. He has said under the next administration, the Biden plan for TPP2 will be dead on day one. TPP was dead on day 3, so now he's even moved it up and made it day 1. Now, of course, IPEF isn't a trade agreement. It doesn't have anything to do with trade. Now that Pillar 1 has been taken out of it, doesn't matter. This plurilateral, multilateral approach to foreign policy, economics, trade is not what the Trump administration is about. They are about bilateral approaches. They believe the U.S. is better served working bilaterally, not in a multi-party system. So what does that mean for Asia, right? Well, there are still huge opportunities in Asia. There's this phrase Alt-Asia, right, which is the alternative to China. And if you compare the alternative of Asia, Alt-Asia to China, more people, more working age adults, about the same level of performance when it comes to logistics, and costs are lower. So lots of opportunity to diversify out of China. And that was a lesson businesses learned in part out of COVID. It's a lesson that businesses have learned because of U.S.-China escalating tensions and escalating restrictions, and because of actions China has taken. So we see this alternative to Asia, but this is going to take a long time, right? Chinese production capabilities are going to be very tough to replicate. The diverse economies of Asia do not work well together, despite ASEAN, despite CPTPP, despite RCEP. Very difficult to make a system out of everything outside of China that you have in China. So China is going to be essential for supply chains for a long period of time. And the more US-China tensions make that harder and harder, it is going to be much more difficult for businesses and trade to deal with. Now, ASEAN is benefiting from US-China tensions. A lot of manufacturing and the supply chain has shifted from China to Southeast Asia. Vietnam, in particular, is the biggest lead. And so for the first time, China's exported more to Southeast Asia than the US. And so that is an amazing number, right? But the question is, how much of that is manufacturing here? How much of that are goods coming from China? They put them in Vietnam or whatever other country. You could pick any country. Take off the Made in China label, put a Made in Vietnam label on it, and then sending it to the US. Well, that would be a transshipment. And transshipments, the US is now focused on. The US does not want to see that the tariffs that they're putting in place are being, that there's workarounds. The US does not want to see that the restrictions they put on, for example, through the Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act for human rights violations, just have workarounds. And so transshipments is going to be a major focus for either the Biden or the Trump administration. And there are probably, I would defer to Deb on this, right, and the Henrich Foundation much more than me, but there's probably going to be a rewritten of trade agreements to change rules of origin. USMCA will certainly be rewritten when it comes to making rules of origin much tighter to prevent this type of circumvention. And you know, this is a summary of the findings that the Commerce Department had last year when it talks about solar cells and modules, right? They look at, you know, all of these different companies, Cambodia, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, circumventing. Real focus, and it's going to be more so. So something to really watch. And then the other question is, well, let's say you do want to move your supply, your manufacturing from China to Vietnam. Well, where is this money going to come from? Because if you just take, this is a friend of mine from Vietnam came up with this statistic. If you take 5% of the manufacturing out of Vietnam and put it into China, you would have to increase the infrastructure spend by 75% in Vietnam. They don't have the highways. They don't have the ports. They don't have the electrical grids. They don't have the water. They don't have the sanitation. They don't have enough of the trained people to do the type of work that's being done in China. So yeah, Vietnam is a great alternative, but where's the money going to come from to make that a reality? So huge issues when it comes, it's very easy to say, well, we're going to decouple between the US and China. Easy to say it, very difficult to do. So overall, what are the long-term trends that we're going to see? Well, we used to, you know, as I said earlier, I talked about that intersection to collision when it comes to business and government. We used to say, well, you think about business and government. Now you really have to think about business in government, right? Business is in government now. Populism is here to stay. It's here to stay in almost every country, not just the US. It's in every country. So how are you going to deal with this rise in populism? Globalization is going to continue to fracture. You're going to have national security concerns rejecting foreign investment that never happened before. So now, if you're a country, you need to think about not only how you're going to protect yourself against your adversaries, you have to think about how you're going to deal with those partners of yours who have protectionist approaches. So how are you going to do that as a business when all of this is increasing? And again, regardless of Trump or Biden winning, U.S. foreign policy is going to be transactional, as my friend Bilahari, former Singaporean diplomat, says, right? Under the Biden administration, it's a polite transactionalism. Under a Trump administration, it's an in-your-face transactionalism. But U.S. foreign policy is going to continue to be transactionalism. And let's put all of this, go back to what Joe Biden worries about the most, the climate crisis is only getting worse. And so even though you might have governments, and the US in particular, say, well, you can't do ESG, you have to do ESG because that's what the climate is going to demand of you. It's what your customers are going to demand of you. It's what your workers and your employees are going to demand of you. So you have to deal with all of it at the same time. So when President Xi, when he was, I don't know if he was thinking about it this way, but I'll use, one of his phrases that he talked about when he last delivered his address. I think it was to the National People's Congress. He said, we have to think about black swans. You have black swans out there, so you always have to kind of think about what a black swan is. Does anyone know what a black swan is when it comes to an event? What would a black swan event be? Right? Somebody said something. It's unpredictable, unforeseeable, or it's something that like happens once in 100 years, right? So you have a once in 100-year flood. And so you could prepare for a once in 100-year flood. You could have training on it. You could put resources on it. You could invest on it. But that would be a total waste. It would not be smart because it's only the odds of that happening are once in 100 years. So you don't worry about black swan events, right? But you do need to worry about gray rhinos. Has anyone ever heard of what a gray rhino event would be? All right, so a gray rhino event, right? If you're lucky enough to go on safari, right? You see gray rhinos. You want to see gray rhinos. You look for gray rhinos, but you say, I have to take precaution. Because if I make a lot of loud noises, if I jump up and down, if I whistle or have an air horn or do something crazy, they could charge and attack me. And if they do that, I'm in a lot of trouble. And so I take precautions when it comes to gray rhinos. Well, there's a lot of gray rhinos facing us right now, and too many of us ignored all those gray rhinos. We all knew a pandemic was possible. Governments knew a pandemic was possible. Businesses knew a pandemic was possible, yet no one prepared for one. And what happened? COVID, killed millions and millions of people, and it cost billions and billions of dollars, yet we weren't prepared for it. We all knew, right? Putin could invade Ukraine. He invaded Ukraine in 2014. There was no reason to believe he couldn't do it again. Yet, what did businesses do? What did governments do? Pretty much nothing. And so it cost billions of dollars, and even worse, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives because we weren't prepared for that. U.S.-China tensions are going to get worse. We saw that coming. We didn't diversify our supply chains. We had to pay for that. And even worse, we knew for decades the climate crisis was coming. We did nothing. Now it's worse. Now we have to act. So we have to act right, on these gray rhinos now. And so I wrote an op-ed about 5 or 6 months ago, and I said, when it comes to those of us who deal with ESG, right, we have to focus on environmental, social, and governance issues, but now we have to have a geopolitical overlay on all of it. So now it's the second time for, we need a second G. It's now ESGG. So we have to have that geopolitics in mind when it comes to everything now. And with that, as we get ready for this Biden-Trump debate, hopefully that happens, may not, but we'll see on Friday. Happy to answer any questions. Yep. Oh, wait. Mike's coming. And then there was one over there we didn't get to last time, so we'll go there next.
Okay.
Yep.
I have several questions. One is, how does Trump feel about old friends? I'm asking that because the Marcos family has been very old friends of Trump. Second, what is Trump going to do with Taiwan?
Right. Okay. The first question is, the answer is, how does he treat old friends? I think it's very transactional. I don't know that there's a lot of loyalty there. So if it's still in his interest, it's in his interest. If you're not in his interest anymore as a government, as a policy, then he will change it. So I think it's his base operating as, at least you'd have to think about preparing for it, is the circumstances changed and we have to deal with that. Now, when it comes to Taiwan, that is the biggest issue or the most existential geopolitical issue we face, certainly in this part of the world, if not other part of the world. Right? Back when I was with UPS, and we would train on crisis, and we would have tabletop exercises, and we would have all our contingency plans, and we would do our training. We had two issues that we were most concerned about. I'm going back about 20 years now. Right? The two issues we were most concerned about, number one was a plane crash. Right? What if one of our planes crashed? Because that would have obviously loss of life, but it would also have a major impact to our business. We'd have to deal with government. So we trained on a plane crash, and we trained on a terrorist attack. We were very worried about a terrorist attack. If you go back 20 years and you saw terrorist attacks in Indonesia, in Jakarta, and in Bali against U.S. companies and U.S. interest, we were very worried about that. Taiwan was not on our list. We did not worry about, a war in the Straits. I don't know UPS specifically, but all businesses, this is one of their biggest issues that they face. And so one of the questions that they have is, we have to be prepared because there could be an accident. We don't, that's the most likely scenario to lead to some type of crisis in the Straits, is that some plane gets too close to another plane, some ship gets too close to another ship, some, captain does something, and now all of a sudden, we've got a hot conflict in the Straits. So you have to prepare for it. Now the question is, it going to be more of a worry under Trump or under Biden? My question is, I don't know. I can kind of have a guess for those two. What I really don't have a guess is, what does Xi Jinping think? What is Xi Jinping going to do? That is the person you have to really think through. What is his planning? What does he see as his upside and downside to doing something? And that's even more difficult to try and figure out than, certainly for a Westerner, what Biden or Trump are going to do. So you're concerned if it's Biden or Trump, but that's not where the focus is so much. Okay, well, quick follow-up.
Clarification.
Yep.
Is Trump going to defend Taiwan?
The U.S. position has always been strategic ambiguity. So we don't know. That's the whole point of what's worked in the U.S. is that Taiwan doesn't know if we're going to come to their defense if they were to declare independence. And China doesn't know if we're going to come to Taiwan's defense if China was to take the first step on aggressive action. And so what most people, Republican Democrats in that foreign policy China world, is strategic ambiguity has worked. It should continue to work. The U.S. shouldn't change from strategic ambiguity. If we switch from strategic ambiguity to strategic clarity, either way, we think we're going to make the likelihood of a real conflict much more so. And so the answer right now I would give you is that I think if either win, we stay with strategic ambiguity as the US, but absolutely something to watch because a lot of the Trump advisors are very much more of we should be outright saying where we're going to draw the line when it comes to Taiwan, but that hasn't happened yet.
Hi, I'm Tawhid from Bangladesh. I have two questions actually. Firstly, as it seems that the United States idea to outsmart Chinese technology, especially putting restrictions on the semiconductor industries or the import of AI chips in the United States, how do you think the United States businesses are going to adopt with these strategic changes? That is one. Secondly, it seems the US is anyway going to enhance their ties with the regional groupings in Asia to outsmart China or China's influence in this particular region. How do you think countries like Bangladesh, who has so far a neutral image in the world politically, how do you think countries like Bangladesh will survive in this in the competition in with the future U.S. Presidents or the politics? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, so in terms of AI, I mean, to kind of think of where we are on, trade and restrictions now, right? The U.S., the model is basically, you can trade anything you want with any country, and China included, except for, right, military equipment, right? So that would be banned, right? So you can't do military equipment. And then there was a small category, what we would call dual use, right? And dual use would be something that could be used for civilian purposes or military purposes. And that was a relatively narrow category. Now that category is wide open because so much of what you use with technology can be used for the military, right? What facial recognition, is that commercial or is that national security, right? When it comes to AI, you make it even more difficult to say where's the line between national security and commercial use. And so businesses are going to have to follow what the US says. And so that definition of what becomes dual use is changing all the time. It's getting bigger, 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 and US companies have to follow it. And then those companies that are involved with the US, even if they're not US companies, they have to follow it. And so that is something that is on the mind of a lot of businesses. How are we going to deal with this new world? Because we don't have a choice. So that's where the world is headed. Now, in terms of how countries are dealing with it, I don't know Bangladesh, but I'll make the analogy to Singapore, and you can tell me if I'm right or not. But Singapore's view, basically everybody in Southeast Asia's view, right, is to say to the U.S. and to China, don't make us choose. We want to be able to do business with both of you. We want to be able to take investment from both of you. We want to be able to trade with both of you. And that is being allowed, right? That is basically the status quo that we've had in Southeast Asia. Now, the question is, will the U.S., with the type of restrictions it's putting on, permit that type of agency to occur? China is getting much more aggressive in other areas as well, especially when it comes to the South China Sea. And so are you going to be able to continue to have that type of balance in Southeast Asia that we've had? I assume Bangladesh would want to be the same. We like the US, we like China, we want to be able to do business with both, we want to be friends with both. It's going to be more difficult for everybody. But I mean, I think at least so far, the US and China recognize that they would rather compete for doing business and having good relations as opposed to putting in saying you have to choose between one or the other. Yep.
Thank you, Bonnie, from the Standard Hong Kong. Actually, I have a couple of questions. So first of all, I'm wondering, yes, so you've been talking about strong economic growth in the States, but I was wondering, what about the heavy debt? I mean, both national debt and then at the same time, private debt is huge. Okay, is it a concern? Okay, and then my second question is about ESG, because it seems that, Europeans, particularly, the German, they have very, very clear stance. But then I was wondering how the Americans think of it, because even on your list, they are not on the top five, I think, at least. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, not at all. And then in the past couple of years, we noticed that, ESG development has been going backward. Yeah. And then and then also at the same time, when you talk about, ESG, we talk about sometimes, greenflation. Yes. So I get some of the Americans, they're very practical in a way. So when they consider inflation, so would they just simply give up, ESG? And then, sorry, too many questions. My third question is, in Biden's term, so there are two wars, okay? So Ukraine and also Israel. So how would that affect, his re-election? Thank you.
Okay, so I think the first question. Wait, now I'm blanking on the first question again. The debt. Right, the first question. Americans should care about the debt. They don't. They just say, "Oh, this is something we'll address when we need to address it." Similar to climate, we know it's kind of a problem, but we'll address it. And so, will the Americans? We'll have to address it at some point. And the question is, will it be, not too late but will just be much more painful than it has to be. It is nothing anybody wants to run on right now, because if you say, how are you going to address the debt in the US? You're either going to, you have to raise the working age so that people don't get Social Security till later, or you have to tax their Social Security benefits, or you have to raise taxes, or you have to cut spending. You know what? Those things are very unpopular when it comes to voters. And so our system is flawed when it comes to having a fix to a long-term problem that has short-term pain. So it isn't an issue in this campaign. It should be. We'll see if it comes up in the debate tomorrow. Both candidates will pay lip service to it, but it's not something that we talk about as Americans in the campaign, and it is a problem for our country. Now, when it comes to ESG, for whatever reason, ESG has got tied up into the social wars. And it got tied up into what we in the US call wokeness. And so all of a sudden, it's that you have, it's Republicans, not all Republicans, but you have certain Republicans who say, oh, well, you're just trying to social engineer through business, and you're just trying to hire people who aren't qualified, and you're trying to change society in ways that are wrong, and therefore we're opposed to ESG. But when I sat down with people who are, anti-ESG, and I say to them, okay, if I'm advising a business, am I allowed to tell that business, let's take a look and see what's happening with flooding in the area where we're looking at putting a new factory? And should we put a factory in an area where the flood risk is increasing? And they're like, well, yeah, you can say that. I mean, well, that's ESG. I mean, that is what ESG is about. ESG is about what are those things from an environmental, social, and governance perspective that can cause real risk to your business, and you want to mitigate that risk. Climate risk is a huge one, right? But you also have geopolitical risk. You have other societal risk. And so you have to take that into account. And so we'll probably stop using, in the US, we stop using ESG. In Asia, you won't, because it just makes financial sense. And so that's what we've been, certainly in the private equity firms that I work with, when they talk to American investors, they don't talk about ESG. But when they talk to Asian investors and European investors, they talk about ESG. But they're not doing different things. It's the same thing. So you just do it at the same time. And quickly, what was your third question? The two wars, how will they impact? This gets into it. Ukraine will probably not impact the war right now. The U.S. is very much in favor overall of supporting Ukraine. Those who aren't in favor of supporting Ukraine, saying, why are we giving tens of billions and hundreds of billions of dollars to Ukraine? Let Europe give them that money. Let them defend for themselves. How is this impacting us? They're voting for Trump. Now, it doesn't matter what's going to happen. So that's not an issue. Those voters are Trump voters, and he's going to get those voters if they're opposed to what the United States and the Biden administration are doing when it comes to Ukraine. Israel-Gaza is a different question because you have serious concerns within the Democratic Party about whether the U.S. should be supporting Israel as it is. And so you're having, especially on the, the left side of the Democratic Party, it's all across the Democratic Party, but concentrated on the left. They are very unhappy with the Biden administration and the Congress's approach to Israel. Now, the question becomes, will those voters aren't going to vote for Trump, I don't think. I mean, you may not be happy with what Israel, the U.S. support is for Israel, but are you going to support a candidate who is in favor of a Muslim ban? Probably not, right? So the question isn't, are those voters going to go over to Trump? The question is, are those voters going to stay home? Are those voters going to stay home, or are they going to come out? And what the Biden administration is very much going to try to do is to say, you may not like the position we have on Israel, but who's going to protect your reproductive freedoms? Do you want to lose your right to choose? Do you want to lose your right to control your body? Or are you going to say, we'll talk to you and listen to you about Israel and Gaza, but you are with us when it comes to your reproductive freedoms. Where are you in terms of immigration? Where are you in terms of student loans? Where are you in terms of the climate? Right? So is there going to be a single issue voter on Israel Gaza who is going to either stay home, likely stay home, I don't think would vote for Trump? That is a really good question. And that is something that is going to determine who's going to win this election.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to end it there. I know there's more questions. Please feel free to email Steve. We included his contact information in the agenda. So let's please thank Steve for all of his expertise today.